Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, her website taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you.
Kris, are we about to be hit with another carbon tax, only they're not going to call it that, and is it going to be kind of a secret the way they slip it in?
That's a great question, and it's something that we really need to pay attention to here in BC because it's something that's percolating over there on the other side of the Rockies in Ottawa. So here in British Columbia, we already pay what is equivalent to a low-carbon fuel standard, and in fact, it apparently adds a hidden 10 to 13 cents per liter to the cost of our gasoline.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, her website taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you.
Kris, are we about to be hit with another carbon tax, only they're not going to call it that, and is it going to be kind of a secret the way they slip it in?
That's a great question, and it's something that we really need to pay attention to here in BC because it's something that's percolating over there on the other side of the Rockies in Ottawa. So here in British Columbia, we already pay what is equivalent to a low-carbon fuel standard, and in fact, it apparently adds a hidden 10 to 13 cents per liter to the cost of our gasoline. It's one of the reasons why even after Premier John Horgan had his big mystery fact-finding mission, he had Scooby-Doo on the case, he couldn't magically explain why our gas prices are so high. This is after, of course, he told them not to look into taxation or government behavior for their culprits. Nonetheless, they came up short. They were mystified as to why they had a 10 to 13 cent hike on gasoline prices per liter. And as Dan McTagg, the gas wizard and petroleum expert, has patiently explained, it's because of the way that we order our fuel. And our format of a low-carbon fuel standard, apparently so. It adds a 10 to 13 cent tax that's hidden onto our cost of gasoline throughout British Columbia. So we'll have to keep a close eye on this because if Trudeau wants one federally, is he going to impose this onto British Columbia again? Are we going to have it doubled up on us? Because if we do the math, it's pretty scary. Right now, our carbon tax here in British Columbia is the highest in all of Canada. That's 8.9 cents per liter for gasoline, just over 10 cents per liter for diesel. And this low-carbon fuel emission standard thing that they latch onto it adds between 10 and 13 cents. Okay, now we're at 20 cents that we're dealing with. They're going to add another 10 to 13 on top of that? So 30 cents, 33 cents extra just in carbon taxes? That's just going to get out of reach for a lot of working people.
When the BC government, the Liberals, introduced the carbon tax in 2008, they claimed it was revenue neutral. I don't think it really was, but people did get a slight rebate back. But under the NDP, there's no rebate, is there?
This is a big one that I really need to unpack for people. So we were told so many things by these politicians back in 2008 when they hatched the BC carbon tax in the first place. They told us it was going to be revenue neutral. They told us that it was going to stop at $30 a ton. They told us that it was going to fund a plethora of affordable alternative energies that we could use and switch to for our vehicles. And most importantly, probably, they told us it was going to reduce emissions. They said they'd go down. Today, none of that is true. None of it. It is not even called revenue neutral. It is $40 a ton. Alternatives are still scarce and scanty for most working people, and emissions are going up. The provincial government's own data, they quietly, silently update it once per year. You have to go to the page yourself and dig every time to try to find it. Their data shows that our emissions have gone up 10% in the past 3 years, and they've gone up within 5 of the last 7. So none of the stuff they promised us when they first hatched this carbon tax is true today. And I'm not just going after the NDP. The BC Liberals fiddled with these books on the BC carbon tax too. Because as you said, back in 2008, they promised it was going to be revenue neutral. Now to be fair, when they first put it in, they did do a countermeasure income tax cut and a countermeasure business tax cut. So one could argue that on paper, it was revenue neutral. So we won't get into home heating and all extra transportation and all that other stuff that does add cost to things. So just on paper, looking at the balance books, that looked revenue neutral. But it didn't take them long. After a couple of years, they started doing something really sneaky. And you can go back and look at the budget documents. So I'm going to unpack it. Say you take in, for argument's sake, $1 billion in the BC carbon tax. That is called BC carbon tax revenue. It's put into a box inside the BC budget document. Then, to make it appear neutral, what they did is they grabbed random tax credits, some of them old, some of them pre-existing, most of them having nothing whatsoever to do with carbon emissions or the environment. Things like the children's fitness tax credit, seniors tax credits, converting school property to farm at 50% base rate tax credit, and most laughably, the Vancouver film tax credit. All this stuff, they grabbed all those tax credits and they shoved it inside of the BC carbon tax revenue. And they did that until it balanced out to zero. It's right there in the documents. And when I went up and asked the deputy finance minister, so the head bureaucrat, the person that actually knows what's going on because they're in government forever and they can explain it to you off the record, he just looked at me and said, yeah, it's always been an accounting exercise. That's all this is. So in layman's terms, it means they'll take the money from you and then they'll spend it.
Now, I always wondered, things that affect climate the most would be things like sunspots, solar flares, changes in the Earth's orbit, volcanic activity. Can you tell me how carbon taxes influence those events?
Great question. So I actually get a lot of emails and phone calls from folks who feel that way. And you know what? What I think of it doesn't matter. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an earth scientist, but I do know taxes, and I know governments, and I especially know how politicians work. Whenever a politician gets a chance of sinking in a brand new stint into taxpayers, and they'll tell you anything to do it, they'll do it. They can say it's for helping a war effort. They can say it's to help for roads. They can say it's to help children afford bus passes. All these really wonderful ideals. They can say it's to help the environment. But once it's in there, you just try to get rid of it. It's in there forever. And then they'll wind up blowing it on silly things. They'll wind up growing the government and expanding their mandate more than what voters want them to. And so some people do feel that that is what is causing climate change or global warming or whatever term you want to do. But when we look at it, let's say for argument's sake, it is completely man-made and it is because of emissions and we are heating up and we need to do something about it. Fine. We take that as granted. When we look around the world, it's emissions from things like burning animal dung and massive amounts of wastes being burnt that sends these toxic emissions up into the atmosphere that a lot of people feel are terrible for the environment in places like India and China. And the good news is, if we can sell them, for example, natural gas coming from places like British Columbia with some of the best environmental regulation extraction rules in the world, some of the best labor relations rules in the world, and sell them that energy, that's so much cleaner. And a lot of folks feel that will do way more to clean up the air, to reduce emissions, and to combat a challenge like climate change. Much more so than taxing moms and dads living in Langley, trying desperately to commute and to ferry their kids into soccer practice and to school. Because that's who the BC carbon tax is hurting right now, is working people in British Columbia. And we can see emissions are still going up. It is not working.
Now, I know the idea is to chase people out of private vehicles onto transit. Well, right now, transit isn't safe if you want to avoid catching COVID. And, I mean, studies have proven it. You're 4 times more likely to get COVID if you travel on mass transit more than 4 times. So, and also if you're a business owner, how do you transport rebar or a cement mixer on SkyTrain?
You don't. It's a nice idea for getting, say, university students to and from, or low-income workers just to and from with their backpacks. I mean, you know, I rode my bike and took transit for 13 plus years while I was living in downtown Ottawa, working up Parliament Hill, but so few people work like that. And I think it really speaks to central urban hubris when they think that they can apply what is really cool urban planning in downtown central cores to everybody else in the rest of the province. Not everybody can do that. Number 1, where you live. Number 2, how many kids you might have. Number 3, how differently abled you may be, how you're able to move around. And here you go with the healthcare issue. The idea of being able to privately move about under your own motive power is really important to a lot of people. And so this war on the car, we don't think is fair when it comes to really accountable government and smaller government. We're always keeping an eye on mission creep. And it seems that a lot of folks just want to move people around almost like a game of civilization or something and have people live the way they see fit. Whereas we think the less government, the better, the less regulation, the better. You know, let people mostly live their lives as long as they're not hurting anybody else, and frankly, quit taxing people to death. And if you keep going with these big government ideas and these big government plans, you'll wind up with much higher taxes, a lot more bureaucrats in power, and average working people paying the bills. And so here we are again with the carbon tax. If alternatives were affordable and available and a great option, people will do them, and we'll probably get there someday. But the point is right now. Are people able to make ends meet right now based on their transportation options? And the answer is unfortunately no. And to really get out on the rebate, actually, if you look carefully at the way the rebate is worded on the BC government and the Canadian government's website, because they come out kind of in a blended nature, once you hit around $60,000 or $65,000 a year as income for a family in British Columbia, that rebate evaporates. It's meaningless. So that climate action rebate thing that they give out in, you know, to make up for the carbon tax here in BC is only for very low income folks. Like I said, if you've
who likely don't have a car and drive anyway.
Exactly. Those folks are usually already on transit. Those folks are already usually, you know, getting rides with friends. That is not helping Brian and Monica who live in Langley and own a minivan and a pickup truck. That's not helping that working family.
So you know Brian and Monica too. Great.
Yes, they're great people.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Value from success. Growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, was it responsible for the Prime Minister to prorogue Parliament during an economic and health crisis?
We always want them to be as accountable as possible. So no, you know, it's one of those things where quite often Prime Ministers of every stripe, I mean, Prime Minister Harper did it, now Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has done it. Prime Ministers do this to reset things. It's when they want to turn a page and have a new throne speech and start fresh. But the problem that happens there, and no matter who does it, is that it shuts down committee work. And what was interesting is what the committees were working on just before people came in and turned all the lights off. And they were working, of course, on the we issue. And so they were really getting down to brass tacks there. And that's when we're saying, this gets to accountability. It would have been nice to have seen them allow the Public Accounts Committee and the Finance Committees and all those other committees that were working on this to finish their work first, and then prorogue if they really felt they needed a reset and to have a new throne speech.
Now, without Parliament in session, can they still take measures, or are they stuck doing what they were doing, but they can't do anything new?
Actually, the Prime Minister's cabinet is very, very powerful. So in the event, God forbid, we were prorogued and something terrible happened, like a natural disaster or an attack or, very rare, they would still have full executive power. They could do what they wanted to. They wouldn't have to have the House of Commons in session. Hopefully, they would be able to bring them back for an emergency vote if it required massive amounts of action. But the cabinet itself contains a lot of power. In fact, after a government changes, a lot of people don't know this. So say, the blue party gets voted out and the red party's going in, or vice versa, we don't care. As of voting day, that minister is still the minister in charge until the next throne speech and the swearing in. Until they name that cabinet and they have the full swearing in there at Rideau Hall in front of the eyes of the Governor General, also known as the representative of Her Majesty the Queen, that minister is still minister until that handover happens. So it isn't on voting day, it's after they form a cabinet. Now, was proroguing Parliament responsible during a crisis time? It depends, right? I think that should be left up to voters and the constituents, because we think that the main part there was getting accountability, and also it wasn't just the we folks that were being investigated. People were also asking pretty tough questions about whether or not we had enough personal protective equipment and where all of it was, what happened to all the masks that we supposedly had stockpiled after SARS, all that good stuff. There were some pretty tough questions coming out for public health bureaucrats. And again, prorogation will hit reset on a lot of that stuff. So yeah, it was probably irresponsible. But again, different parties like to use prorogation as a way of hitting each other with sticks. We don't like to see it ever, but if they want to do that just to reset things, that's not the biggest deal in the world. We know elections are very expensive to hold, and that's the price you pay for democracy. But it looks like the BC NDP is gearing up for an election because they're doing well in the polls. I see Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, has renominated all 77 of his provincial members of Parliament to stand for re-election. It looks like a lot of governments, because they're doing well in the polls right now, are going to call a quick election, whether they have fixed dates or not. That news about Ontario really has me scratching my head, because Doug Ford was relatively just recently elected. He has a big majority and a darn strong mandate. So if Ontario suddenly goes to an election, I'd be very surprised. But once one of them does it, and as we saw New Brunswick just did it, that will give a lot of capital and credit to whatever premier has his or her eye on polls and say, let's go for it. So we'll be ready regardless of whether they have an election this fall here in BC or in the spring or next fall, as most people had been expecting it previously. And frankly, voters will decide if they're mad about the timing of an election. Just putting my old journalism hat back on, I remember quite often the lead up to a writ drop and an election call process was a big thing. When, where, why, how are they going to hold the vote, all that stuff. But once that vote gets started and the election gets rolling, that quickly evaporates. Like within 36 hours, they start getting into the back and forth. We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, Jordan Armstrong of Global Television has dug up that Vancouver City Hall, at a time when they wanted to cut police and other budgets, has gone out and bought a bunch of luxury furniture for City Hall. Was that a good move? Was it needed, or was it just bad optics?
Never a good move, and kudos for them for digging up that story. We're going to go be kicking the tires on that really hard, and frankly, when you usually see one dumb expense on something like that, there's usually a lot more. So we're going to try to turn that hall upside down and shake it until things fall out of it. Frankly, they should never be spending money on expensive office furniture. You can always find affordable alternatives to chairs if they desperately need to be replaced, affordable alternatives to desks, although desks don't often wear out, frankly. They're just big glorified tables. We always are disappointed when we see something like this. And give you a good example, Global Affairs Canada. Federally, they spent tens of thousands of dollars on seat cushions, for goodness sake. And this is where I think a lot of people who work in private sector, who often share desk space or office space or deal with equipment that's 20 years old and make do and keep the lights going, and then they turn around and see where their taxes are going, and they see city halls getting lavish treatment on our dime. This is what makes people furious. And it should make them furious. No matter where they are on ideology, they shouldn't want their money wasted, and they should demand accountability. So, no, they should never be blowing their money on expensive things like office furniture, ever.
Kris, did you get a negative vibe when the Canadian government spent $8,800 at a German sex toy exhibition?
No kidding. So this is one, again, you brought up that one. It's something that we dug up through access to information here at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and it's part of the Global Cultural Fund within the group called Global Affairs, and it's running out of Ottawa. This group, it is the poster child for government waste. They routinely blow through their yearly budget, and we mean by millions of dollars. They're not taken over by $15. Millions of dollars wasted, and in your example, yeah, we spent that amount of taxpayers' money on a talking sex toy exhibit. The title of the exhibit is so inappropriate, I won't say it, but it was put on in Germany, and we paid for it. And you know what? If that's your thing, go for it, man. Like, awesome, give her. But taxpayers shouldn't be funding it. This is where we get into really dodgy territory whenever taxpayer dollars are funding art. Because whose art is this, right? Who likes what type of art that is so personal and individual? So no, we should not be funding this kind of nonsense. And that same group, not connected whatsoever to the sex toy exhibit in Germany, but the same group of funding gave around $50,000 to a very schmancy red carpet photograph display of Bryan Adams's photographic work. And that was put on at the ROM, which is a very fancy museum in downtown Toronto. And it was pictures of people like Prime Minister Trudeau and Anne Murray and Celine Dion, which is great. I mean, good for him. But he's a mega rock star. And all of the folks attending this very schmancy party are very rich people. Why did the average Canadian taxpayer chip in $50,000? That's nonsense.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for caring.
And, I don't know every time though, but, yes, the sex toy exhibit rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
We got bad vibes from it. You can go to our website and see pictures and video of them moving around and talking if you really want to.
I've heard there's quite the buzz about it. My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Is there somewhere people can contact you if they have concerns about government waste or misspending of their tax money?
Yes, please, especially if they spot it. Blow that whistle. We'll protect your name. My email address is ksims@taxpayer.com. And once again, go to our website and you can hit me up there. My cell phone number, my email address, everything is there.
And if you have questions for Kris and can't get through to her there, you can also send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.